other folk who helped start the Mastermind. Introduce yourself. Then we'll jump into a few questions and go from there.
Sounds good.
Okay. No worries. So, shall we get started, or it is streaming now? From what I can
Looks
see.
like it is. I'm assuming it's recording as well when he sees. There's Ethan.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Is it recording as well now, Ethan?
That's a good.
It said it was streaming. So
yeah, I'm going to. Yeah, it should be recording as well. We should be good. Okay, so I can get us started just for everyone's information. My dad passed away today, so it's a little bit of a odd circumstance for me,
brother.
But
so sorry.
No problem. Everything it's been probably the best it can be, So anyways, I'll probably cut out of the meeting after doing a brief introduction, and then let you guys take it from there, and I'll probably just hop back in maybe the last 5 minutes or so or something like that. So just for everyone out there that's looking on the live stream, this is a business podcast Mastermind. Started from a few talented friends in the business podcasting space, and we've expanded it to bring in interested, talented, smart podcasters and people in the industry, and also some attendees, and open it up. So I'll give a introduction to the other hosts here very quickly. I don't have my notes on that, so I'll just wing it. But I've read through it enough time. I think I can get through it. So we got Rob Greenlee here. He's over at Libsyn, VP of Content and Marketing. Is that right? Content and
Partnerships.
Yeah. VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, and a veteran podcaster, Henry Lopez. He's the host of the How of Business podcast, and he's it's a top podcast. He's been growing for many years and a real superstar with a lot of great information. Vinay Koshi of the Predictable B2B podcast, and he assists people with content marketing and really managing their reputation online. So I'm Ethan Janney, and I'm a coach, and among other things, I host the Run With It podcast, business podcast. 7+ figure entrepreneurs come on and share business ideas with our listeners. And I coach founding teams towards Fortune 500 dreams. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Vinay. He's brought on our guest for today, which is Phil Palucha, who I haven't met before. So I'm very intrigued to hear your guys' conversation. Without further ado, have at it.
Excellent. Thanks, Ethan. So brief intro for Phil. Phil is a business growth coach for service-based businesses who found the business cheat codes to scaling his service-based businesses without social media and cold calling. He has since been guiding his clients to achieve influencer status in their niche, becoming the go-to brand for the services they offer, whilst empowering them to spend more time doing what they are best at. He is also, of course, a podcaster, TV and radio host. In fact, he is one of the top 100 podcasters globally. His mission is simple. He wants to be the Napoleon Hill of podcasting, to empower 1 billion entrepreneurs, and that his company, Billionaires in Boxes, becomes the world's most recognized entrepreneurial influencer broadcasting network. Phil, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's I'm looking forward to it. Nothing I enjoy more than a good podcast nerd off. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this.
Excellent. Phil, I believe, if I remember correctly, your initial start with podcasting took the form of a sports podcast. Would that be right?
It did. Yeah, very much so.
How did that tell us a bit about that, and how did it influence your talents and abilities in acquiring clients?
It had a big impact on everything I still do to this day. So my background was originally in sports. I was actually a half decent football player, soccer player, depending on where you're listening to this from in the world. Not the big one where people bash into each other, the little one where people fall around and pretend they've been shot. That one. I didn't get my professional contract at 16. I was with Manchester City, and I didn't get it. So I ended up moving over to Central Europe. So I played for a couple of clubs in Hungary. And I kept injuring my shin bone, which wasn't very nice. It kind of has the consistency of dried spaghetti. So in the end, it was like, okay, this isn't going to be my career. Maybe I should go into coaching. And after about a year of coaching, I quickly realized that this was not what I wanted to do. I love the game, but coaching it and playing it are two very completely different things. And I just did not get the same buzz from it. So I left and I went into the corporate world. But I still love sport, especially football, and I miss talking about it. And a good friend of mine who's a sports journalist had just started a sports podcast. So he was like, listen, why don't you come on? It's going to be a really unique insight because you've literally just left the game. Some of the players we're talking about, you actually know them on a personal level. So you can kind of give us a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. And it really went from there. But what was fascinating even in those early days, so we're talking at least 10, 11 years ago at this point, was that they weren't making any money from the podcast at all. Like it was almost like a semi-expensive hobby. Like they were paying to host it. They were putting all of their time and effort into it, but nothing was coming from it. And I remember, within about 6 months, we'd grown it to about 15,000 downloads per episode. We were doing 3 episodes a week. One was kind of a review of the week. One was an upcoming what's to come and let's just have a good football chat. And the other tended to be after a game, we'd do a post-match reaction, which would usually get a lot of attention. Sometimes it was if we'd won, it was just a good opportunity for everyone to celebrate. If we lost, it was a good opportunity for people to rant and get angry. And it just worked for us. But I couldn't understand why we weren't making money from this, because my attitude was, well, if you just look at this from a marketing perspective, we have data and we have listeners. We have 15,000 listeners per episode. We know that the majority of them are males aged between 18 and 35. We know that they have disposable income. We know that they're interested in these sports teams. Surely somebody will be prepared to pay for that data. And that's really where the monetizing podcasting really started in its most sort of primitive form, was selling advertising and sponsorship to the kind of people that we knew would be of interest to our audience and adding value to them. And it kind of just grew from there. Now, where that's kind of led to today was when I left the corporate world. So we're talking a couple of years later at this point, when I left the corporate world and decided that I wanted to set up on my own in terms of my service-based businesses. So I'm a surveyor by trade at this point. I've done my RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors qualification. I've gone and worked at some pretty cool real estate companies and got to board level relatively quickly. Probably my competitive nature came out in business. I couldn't put it down. I still wanted to be the best, even though I was now in business and not in sport. And I kind of naively, and most people laugh when I say this because everyone recognizes it in some degree or another, I rather naively thought, I'm doing really well in the corporate world. So when I go and set up on my own, the phone's just going to ring. Clients are just going to come find me. And shock horror, that didn't happen. But I didn't have the budget to compete in terms of with my larger competitors to try and do digital advertising. I didn't understand enough about social media marketing to try and compete on that front. And I used to hate it when people used to cold call me. So there was no way that I wanted to go and do that to people. So it kind of left me in a bit of a dilemma thinking, well, how do you get yourself out there? How do you introduce yourself to more customers? So I thought, okay, by this point, I've grown and sold 2 sports podcasting networks. In fact, the last sale of one of them actually funded me to set up this business in the first place. So I thought, I wonder if I can use podcasting for business. So I wonder if I can take the same methodology and I can build relationships with the right people. I can, I always say business is a team sport. So can I recruit the best people for my team, both internally and externally to my business through podcasting? So the most basic strategy I used, and I still smile when I think back to how this worked, was I just made a list of the top 100 companies that I wanted to work with. And I invited each and every single one of their CEOs onto a podcast just to talk to me about who they are and their story and who their business is and who does it help. I wasn't selling them anything. I wasn't trying to pitch to them. I wasn't trying to flip them. This was just a case of, I knew that if I meet with 100 of these people, I'm going to resonate with the people I'm supposed to. They're going to resonate with me, and stuff's just going to happen as a result, which is exactly what happened. So we went from being just me sat on my kitchen counter with my head in my hands going, oh, dear Lord, where am I going to win clients from? To having to hire 25 people full-time globally to help me deliver the work. We were winning federations exclusively that we had no right becoming exclusive partners for. We were beating firms hands down that employed thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. That then led to keynote speaking opportunities and being flown all over the world, and now starting to be recognized as an influencer and authority in the industries that I worked in. We'd now gone from trying to win individual clients via the phone and all that kind of stuff to now winning heaps of clients from a room full of executives that were being paid to speak in front of. It was like, this is awesome. This is fun. This is enjoyable. Like, I'm actually having fun with this stuff. And yeah, it kind of really grew from there. So we had a lot of success. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I had more and more people coming to me saying, like, can you just teach me that bit? Like, can you show me how you did that for your business? Because I want to do that for my business. Like, how did you end up on the news? Like, how do you get Sky ringing you for your expert opinion on stuff? And it's like, how did you end up on that stage on the other side of the world being paid to go there and then come back with so much business? Like, I want to do that. And being a surveyor, like, my instant reaction was to try and blueprint this to get as simple strategy as possible. You know, it was a case of, I was used to looking at big complex buildings and saying X amount of steel plus X amount of man hour plus this plot of land equals this. And I wanted to do the same when it came to that kind of authority building and global networking using the podcasting as the vehicle. So we started coaching that about 5 years ago. About 3 years ago, we started offering done for you services as well, which I just call turn up and talk, which is, you know, if you want to kind of design that strategy and build those relationships, we can either teach you how to do it yourself, or we can teach you how to do it and do it for you. But the sports element runs really deep right the way through, because it's how did you grow a successful sports podcast? Well, you added value. You made sure it was entertaining. You made sure that every time somebody listened to it, they could escape reality for a little while and enjoy in the authenticity of it, which is why I love podcasting so much, because podcasting for me is the most authentic form of communication there is out there in the market. TV is way too polished. Radio is look, radio is fine, but it feels like it's dying a little bit. And even that feels forced. It feels like, you still get these people with the radio voice, don't you? They sound like they're 1950s jingle men. Whereas podcasting is it's like you meet somebody at an exhibition, you say, hey, we're getting on really well. Should we go for a beer together? Should we go for a coffee? You sit and have a great conversation. And a podcast essentially is that conversation with a third chair sat at the table for the audience to engage with and listen to it as well. And I really love that.
Excellent. A couple of things I'd like to perhaps pick out from what you said. The first being that you add value. Now, added value is something that's talked about a fair bit, but could you elaborate on that in terms of what you're doing more currently with businesses? What does that look like?
So I'll give you two answers in terms of for us and then for our clients, because obviously I think they're all slightly different. With us, let's do that first. We can only work with a certain number of people every year because it's nice and intensive. It's very kind of one-on-one focused, and I don't particularly like group and online training, so I do a lot of one-to-one mentorships and interactions. So my attitude towards that was that, using the Napoleon Hill for podcasting thing, as you mentioned earlier, I'm still learning from these conversations that I'm having on a weekly basis, and I want to make sure that other people can engage with that content as well. Like my attitude has always been, I'm growing and learning, so I'm just going to put that out there for free in the public domain. And if somebody else hears that when they're supposed to, and they grow and learn from that at the same time, then fantastic. But that value add for me is very much about like, what is it I'm trying to achieve? Right. So how is it we get to those places? How is it we do those things? So let's use the example of keynote speaking. Like a lot of people will say this, they're like, I'd love to get more speaking engagements in my industry. It's like, well, actually, that's relatively simple. Like, you just network with more of the people who are organizing those events, and you network with the people who are already speaking at those events. But instead of just looking at that from your perspective, because that's what you're getting out of this, what's the value add you're giving to them? If it's an event organizer, it may well be selling tickets. It may well be selling tickets to the event or raising awareness for the fact the event's happening at all. If it's the speaker, it might be putting a spotlight on their business, or indeed giving them time to practice the way they're going to present or try stuff out on you. And it's like the whole stand-up comedian thing, isn't it? They do open mic nights and comedy store stuff, and then the jokes that are the funniest, they cherry pick that joke, put it into a box somewhere, and when they have enough of them, they go and do a tour with those funniest jokes. Well, it's the same with speakers. You try out different things on different audiences, you see what resonates, and you go, right, that bit there really resonated, so that's going to form part of my next talk when I'm doing X, Y, and Z event. And that's really where my value add focus is focused at the moment. It's what can I give to people that then in turn allows them to come and give to me. Like, how you have to give before you receive. I'm a firm believer in that. So if I'm giving you a platform and a spotlight to come and talk about what you're talking about, great, but I want to get something out of this as well. I want to learn from you. I want to, learn from your failures, learn from your successes. I'm a firm believer in you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. If somebody's already been there, done that, go meet them and see how they did it. Value add when it comes to our customers, it depends on the stage that they're at on that kind of authority building journey. Now, a lot of people come to us and say, I want to be an influencer. But what they actually mean is that they want to be famous, because they don't really want to influence anybody. They just want the benefits that come with being famous. And there's nothing wrong with that, provided you understand why it is you're trying to do this and who it is you're trying to connect with. So value add there is very much letting your customers tell you what they want, rather than the other way around. And so often that's not the case. Most businesses sit there either on their own or in a board meeting setting, and they'll be thinking, how do we reach our customers? How can we do more for our customers? How can we help our customers? And the one person who's not in that room or represented in that room is the customer. I mean, surely they're the best people to ask. And podcasting is a phenomenal way of doing that, because, I always say to people, if you know what sector you want to work in, but you're not quite sure what you want to do as an entrepreneur or how it is you want to help them, go on podcast with 50 to 100 of the business leaders in that sector. And believe you me, they'll tell you what's wrong. They'll tell you where their pain points are. They'll tell you the things that they're struggling with that they would like somebody to solve for them. So the value add can quite often be a case of, I'm going to give you a bit of knowledge regarding my expertise that can help you on that journey. It might be this really small cog in a wheel, but it might be the cog that just gets it turning better or turning full stop. And in return, I'm going to learn from you and your market experience and your knowledge. So the value add goes both ways. It's designed that both parties in this are gaining something from the conversation.
Excellent. And Deb's just asked a question similar to what I had in mind, but Deb says, a great story. Can you share a little more from speaking to your top 100 CEOs? And what was the next thing that happened that led to building your business?
Very good question. So it kind of happened progressively. I didn't have to speak to all 100 before this started happening. It actually started happening after person like 4 or 5. What I found was really interesting was, because I was being really authentic and I wasn't trying to sell them anything, I would get to the end of a podcast and they would often turn the conversation to, hey, I've really got on with you. Like, I should introduce you to my ops director, or I should introduce you to this person. And what I realized was that the people who resonated with me were very kind of open to that. They'd either suggest it themselves or were very open to a conversation along the lines of, look, I've really enjoyed talking with you. I kind of feel like we got a bit of a vibe going on here. And then, positive buying signals. Yep, I agree, Phil. I've had a great time. Just a reminder, this is what I do. I do this, this, and this. I'd love to do some more work with you. If the opportunity comes up, let me know. Another one that I used to do is, if I ever felt, I'm not a very pushy person when it comes to kind of sales. Like, I've never been that person. So I always say that I introduce, I don't sell. Like, I introduce people to what we do. And if it resonates with them, then great. If it doesn't, like, I'm not going to try and convince you. So if I ever wanted to ask the question, but felt a bit kind of cheeky asking the question outright, I would usually say something along the lines of, so listen, really enjoyed this podcast. We'll be releasing it in X amount of time. 2 quick questions for you. Number 1 is, who should I send this to in your marketing team so that we can get them to share that out with your network as well? Again, benefits them, but benefits me. And question number 2 is, this is what I do. You know, if you know of anybody who would find use in my service, would you mind making an introduction? And 9 times out of 10, they go, oh, well, me. Like, I'd be interested in that conversation. And then you almost sort of take it by surprise. Like, oh, I never thought of that. It's like planting the seed of idea in their mind and then going, oh, I love that idea. But it just works so naturally and so organically, because my intention is never to try and sell to somebody when I'm bringing them onto a podcast. And that's because my attitude is, until I know you, I don't know if I want to work with you. Like, you might have a business profile that I'm looking at thinking, yeah, you look like somebody great to work with. But if I get you on the podcast and actually we don't gel at all, like, let's do both of ourselves a favor and not work together. Because we've all done that, haven't we? We've all worked with clients that we really wish we hadn't bothered. And actually, we probably could have avoided a lot of that pain and heartache just by building a better relationship with these people to see whether we gel. I use the saying, your vibe attracts your crowd, and I'm a huge believer in that. Your vibe attracts your tribe. That's what I'm trying to say. Put my teeth in, and I'm a huge believer in that, because if you put yourself out there and people really don't gel with you, like, they are not the people for you to be working with. The people that get it and are like, I love this guy, we got on really well, we should be doing more business together. That's where the best business relationships come from, because they respect you, you respect them, and it's far more peer-to-peer. Does that answer your question? Do you want me to go into a bit more detail what happened next?
No, this is absolutely fine. And the interesting thing, I really enjoy those 2 questions. They are non-salesy and just saying, here's how I can help you, or might you drop a line? And if you can't say those 2 things, then you're probably not talking to the right person on your podcast, which is sometimes a struggle, because you can have amazing conversations that are providing value to your people. But if you can't do the sale or, create something of a more meaningful connection afterwards, it was just a nice conversation and probably not the right person to have on your podcast. And that's tough sometimes, but I have to start making that switch.
I think that's a really great point. And actually, it doesn't always just have to be the sale either. So, I'm a big believer. I use podcasting for everything. I use it for getting speaking engagements. We've won our radio and TV shows from it. I've got tickets to sports events for it and been sent to the Champions League final twice, with complimentary tickets to go and do. So I use podcasting for everything. It's like my secret weapon. But actually, even things like, so here's one. I had somebody I knew was never going to become a client of mine, never, because we work in completely different circles. But there's a particular business author that I know quite a few of my clients really like their work. So I made a deliberate point of bringing them onto the podcast to have a conversation, because my attitude was, if 3 or 4 of my clients at the moment like this guy, other people who are similar to them that would also be good clients of mine will also be reading his work. So publicly aligning myself with this author is a really clever idea. Plus, I'm going to get to learn from them. I'm going to get to have that conversation one-on-one. There's so much that doesn't go into a book, because you have to be careful about how much you're putting in, and the fact that it doesn't turn into an encyclopedia. I know that from personal experience. So you get so much more from a conversation. And actually, some of those podcasts, the podcast with the authors or podcasts with coaches from The Secret Movie, for example, they've been some of the interviews that now current clients have come to me and said, I heard your interview with X. I really love them. I've been following their work for many years. And that's been the reason that they're getting in contact with me, because they've seen that association. I use a saying a lot, which I say, international credibility for domestic dominance, which essentially means if you're seen to be speaking with the best people in your industry from around the world, it doesn't even matter whether you have a localized business. You've now taken that local business to, it's actually a benefit. Like, you're a web designer from Chicago. Well, if all these great people from all around the world are speaking to you, aren't Chicago lucky that you're the web designer who's there taking care of them when you're so internationally recognized? And the great thing about podcasting is it's very difficult for people to differentiate. And it's the same with blogs and being an author, actually. It's the same kind of category. it's very difficult for people to differentiate from you being the best at what you do and being the best at the podcaster or a best-selling author in that subject. There's an automatic assumption that if you're the best running one of the best podcasts or you're a best-selling author in that space, you must be one of the best people in that space. And that's a very powerful tool.
I had a question for you, Phil.
Sure, Rob. I love your t-shirt, by the way.
Well, thank you.
I saw it when you came on.
One of the core principles of any type of sales, and especially these days with the internet and how relationships typically can be used to build sales. How do you think about the concept of overcoming objection? So how do you learn what the objections are, and then how do you do it more from a proactive standpoint? Because I think it's key to converting people.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful point. You know, I think the thing with objection handling is that there has to be a balance, doesn't there? Because there's a point of overcoming a misconception, which can be an objection, or, you know, providing a bit more detail that may have been missing from the original conversation. And then once you go beyond that line, now it's about convincing them. It's about trying to change somebody's mind or almost hoodwink them into a sale. And I guess that's, again, one of the things that I really love about podcasting is that you get to have, you know, you think about the traditional sales call. Okay. I mean, I don't know whether you were trained in sales in the same way that I was, but it was here's a script, here's a phone, and here's a book of objections and how to overcome them. And one of the fascinating things with that is that you have to try and fact find, don't you, in a conversation? You get them on a phone, and it's about trying to engage them in that conversation.
It's all about asking questions. It's about asking questions, right?
Absolutely, to find out about their business, because the more information they can give you, the easier it is to overcome objections. In fact, you can usually preempt an objection by saying, you know, a lot of my customers feel this and this and this way prior to working with us, but actually the reality is this. And then they don't even feel the need to say that objection because you've just overcome it. But that comes with practice. It comes with experience. It comes from knowing your customers. The thing that I find still to this day most fascinating about podcasts is that fact find mission can be flipped completely on its head on a podcast, because instead of trying to extract that information from somebody, they're freely giving it to you as part of their story and part of their podcast. You know, asking somebody, tell me about you, tell me about your journey, what's going well in the business, or talk to me, and, you know, still asking the same questions, but what, you know, what's going on in the business that if you had a magic wand, what would you change today? You know, what's the biggest headache? You know, who can I introduce you to that can help you overcome that kind of objection, you know, or that issue, or whatever it is that's going on in your business. And they just give you the answers in the podcast. And I used to think that this is what I describe as like the business cheat codes, because it's like everyone else is busy dealing with middle management and trying to get them on the phone and trying to get a call back and all this kind of stuff. And it's when they do get them on the phone, it's like, hey, I know this is an unsolicited call, but would you want to tell me everything that's going on in your business so that I can then try and sell you something? And people see through this. It's like, no, of course I don't want to do that. But on a podcast, you're dealing with the head honcho. You're dealing with the guy or girl right at the very top of the tree, talking to them on a very high level about their business. And it's a conversation. It's peer-to-peer. They open up and they tell you all of this. And invariably, it may not be the CEO that you need to sell to, your product or service. But an introduction from the CEO to their marketing director, that's always going to go much further than you trying to cold call that same marketing director. It's much easier to go down than it is to go up. You know, you can't get a sales manager to introduce you to the CEO, but you can sure as hell get the CEO to introduce you to the sales manager. So when it comes to objections, I guess the short version of the answer would be ask the questions on the podcast so that you better understand your customers. You ask those questions in a much more natural setting that's very conversational. And rather than trying to objection handle by trying to just sell somebody your product, this is an important distinction. Rather than just trying to sell somebody your product, I only objection handle if I truly believe that what it is that I'm offering can help them grow. If they haven't seen that and I need to overcome that objection, that's fine. But I don't just want to overcome the objection just for the sake of getting the sale. Like, I genuinely have to believe that this is going to empower and enrich what you're doing. And if it's not, then I'd rather just save my reputation and save your annoyance and say, yeah, look, we do this, this, and this, but I don't think that's right for you at the moment. And people respect that so much more as well.
Yeah, and they'll be more likely to refer you to other people.
Precisely.
Right.
Exactly, because it's seen as a sign of respect, isn't it? It's like that you had the opportunity to try and sell me something. You didn't just jump on it and try and just sell something that wasn't right. You know, I always say the same thing to this day, which is if we can't help you, I'll freely admit like we're not the people to help you. And if I know them, I will introduce you to somebody that can. And I'm a big believer in that business is far more partnership and collaboration based than it is competitor based. You know, I was saying this the other day, like somebody said to me, they couldn't believe I rang one of my competitors in the US and because I saw them making a mistake that I'd made a couple of years ago. And it was actually quite a costly mistake. So I rang them and I told them, and I was like, listen, don't do that. It's unlikely to work for you. This is what I found that worked. And when I told a couple of people that, they were like, why would you tell your competitors that? And I was like, well, because I can only work with 30 to 40 people a year, I'm usually oversubscribed. I'm not that selfish that I'm just going to think that only 30 to 40 people a year need these services and these things to help them. So if there are other businesses out there helping people, why would I not want them to do a good job? That doesn't make any sense. It makes the industry as a whole stronger. So of course I'm going to share that advice. And who knows, maybe they'll do the same for me one day.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly. Deb's got another question. What are your messages or communication strategies that work well when getting to the CEO or A-lister?
I love that question. One simple answer: authenticity. They get sick of being sold to. And most people at that level find that nobody ever asks them about them. They just want to tell them about their business and their service. Nobody ever actually bothers to ask the CEO about themselves or their business or their journey. So the typical conversations that I use that really open this up really well. I mean, a lot of these people just come from LinkedIn. You know, connect with them on LinkedIn, send them a personalized message to say, you know, if it's been recommended or referred, or, you know, often my message goes something along the lines of, I was looking at your profile. We have a lot of connections, shared connections. I'm surprised we haven't met yet. Would love to learn more about you and your business and what you do. I run a podcast that does this, this, and this. Let me know if you'd be interested in having a conversation. And the ones that are interested, you know, some people come back and it's like, what do you want to know? What do you want to ask me? It was worse in the old days. And I mean the old days, like 5 to 10 years ago. You'd invite somebody onto a podcast and they'd behave more like you were inviting them into a police interrogation. It's like, what do you want to know? Why are you asking me this? How did you find me? Who gave you my details? And it's like, I just want to talk to you, dude. Relax. Whereas now I think people are far more open to that. But what they don't want is to be sold. What they don't want is to be charged for the privilege of having that conversation. If you position it as a peer-to-peer, I just want to get to know you. I want to, you know, we work in the same industry. It looks like you've got a fascinating journey. I'd love to learn about you, and I'd love to learn about your business. And the reason I ask about those two things specifically, number one, everybody loves to talk about themselves. Rule of Psychology 101. It's like the more you can get somebody talking about themselves, the more they like you. Okay, so there's the first reason you start with that. Second reason is they're paid to talk about their business. They're paid to talk about that business growth. So coming onto a podcast where they can, yes, have a one-on-one conversation, but actually it's one to many, isn't it? Because now they can use this for marketing. They can reach a whole new audience. It's about what they're getting from this. They're giving their time and expertise and their value. And in return, they're getting to reach a new audience and do marketing work that the marketing director is going to give them a pat on the back for. So they're two very big ticks in this person's life. They get to talk about themselves and they get to talk about their business. And from there, you just kind of let it flow, right? Go down the rabbit hole. I always have a couple of questions set out that I want to talk to them about. I invariably get to ask about half of them because we'll get onto a subject or a topic that's really interesting and we just go down the rabbit hole. Let's just have some fun with that. Let's dive into it. And they're the conversations that really mean a lot. You build great relationships, and they're the conversations that your listeners really enjoy engaging with.
Well, thank you for that. That's very helpful, and I do follow that style. One small thing in that rabbit hole is then when they say, oh, that's interesting, let me have my admin help you. And then it goes into the black hole again. So that's the follow-up, is how then do you get through the admin to get the conversation set up. So I just started going straight to the top and not go from B to C to A. And I agree with what you're saying. I know it's going to break open some great opportunities.
So one of the things that I do to try and overcome that straight away is that I have to do a podcast pre-call. I always do a pre-call before every single podcast. And there's a lot of reasons I do that. It helps with the flow of the podcast, because if you've already had that initial get to know each other for a few minutes beforehand, it helps the flow of the show. But one of the great ways, from what you're just saying, for example, is if somebody says, that's great, let me get you my PR director or my PA or someone to get back in touch with you, being able to go back and really kind of reestablish the tone as peer-to-peer, which is great. Before we book that in, I would need to talk to you just to kind of better understand you and your journey, and just so that I can really understand what it is we're going to be discussing on the podcast. And then by all means, I'm happy to link up with your PA or your PR director, and we can get a date set in concrete and get that all confirmed. Here's a link to my booking diary so that we can arrange a 15-minute podcast pre-call. You let me know when you can do.
Very helpful. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
So, Phil, just to make sure I understand this correctly,
sure.
Because listening to you, one would think your personality goes a long way in building rapport with your guests. But in saying that you are now teaching the same process to others, would you say that it's primarily strategy or question driven in terms of building rapport with your guests, and personality has perhaps a smaller component to it?
I think you have to have a personality is probably one thing that I would say. But I think that applies in everything, doesn't it? It's like how to win friends and influence people. If you have no personality, that's going to be quite difficult. You can be asking the right questions, but if you're dull as dishwater, no one's really going to interact with you. But I think it's about flipping business on its head. Because, I mean, you think about like these business networking events, and I'm sure we've all been to them, right? You have like this round table thing where you get 5 minutes or even 2 minutes just to pitch. And you don't ask anybody about them. You just wait for your turn, stand up, pitch what it is you're going to say about yourself, and then sit back down. And invariably, you're not even listening to other people's pitches because you're busy thinking about what you're going to say for your pitch. But the thing is, everybody at the table is doing the same thing. So who's listening if you're all sat there thinking about who's going to say what, and then you say it? Like, it's about flipping that on its head entirely with networking and through podcasting. And it's about really wanting to understand more about the other person. So I often say that my podcast is not about me. My podcast is about gaining value and learning from other people. My opportunity to talk is when I guest appear on other people's podcasts. And now I'm not the host anymore. I'm the guest. They're asking me about my work. Now I'll talk about my work. But it's not look, it's okay to mention what you do and bring it up and have it in a natural conversation, just as you would, using that analogy before, of exhibition. You meet someone, you go for a coffee, you go for a beer. You are going to talk about what you each do, but it's not going to be like a pitch off where they talk about themselves and then you talk about yourself. It's got to be far more conversational than that. And when you have somebody on a podcast, how disrespectful would it be to say, please come on a podcast and tell me about you and your business, and then I spend 35 minutes just talking about myself and my business and all that kind of stuff. So by all means, I will put a throwaway line in there. Like, I completely agree with you. We're actually working with somebody very similar who experienced this. And let me ask you, how did you deal with this? But it's more of a segue. It's more of a bridge. It's more of I'm showing that I'm keeping up with this conversation. This is still peer-to-peer, but this is about you. This is about me learning from you. And when I then get on guest podcasts, that's when people can ask me the questions. That's when they have their questions, that the things that they want to know about Billionaires in Boxes, things that they want to know about our work. And that's when I'll kind of answer those things. And that's exactly the same thing that I teach to my customers. And it's two sides to the same coin. Like, a lot of people will podcast, but they don't guest on other people's podcasts. That for me is a missed opportunity, because, it depends what you want to do. If you just want to be seen alongside all the industry leaders, then fine, just have your own podcast and interview industry leaders. But if you want to be seen as an authority figure and one of those influencers, you need to appear on the same shows that they're appearing on. You need to be on their shows just as much as they need to be on yours. I've certainly found with my clients and with me, especially over the last sort of 2 to 3 years, there's a lot more podcast exchanges going on, which is like, you come on mine, I'll come on yours, and we'll both talk to each other's audience that way. Now, the only reason you need to do that is because there is always a host and a guest situation. One asks the questions, one answers the questions. Yes, it's conversational, But if it was 50-50 and it wasn't about listening or the power of listening, you could have just created one piece of content and sent it out to both. But there has to be a different format with this. It's, who's trying to learn from who at this particular time.
Which, thanks for sharing that, and raises another question in my mind. How do you pick your podcast guesting opportunities? Because I'm sure you get a lot of requests, but how do you pick wheat from the shaft, so to speak?
It's a very good question. Actually, the irony is how I do this for my customers is usually different to how I do it for myself. And I'll explain, right? So with my customers, it's quite often based on where they're trying to get to, and is this going to help them achieve that end destination? Is this getting them closer towards that goal? Are other people in the industry that they're aspiring to be like and be seen near appearing on these podcasts? I often look at it as kind of like a league thing, right? Okay, so you got Championship, you got League One, Championship, and Premier League. That's the way I look at it. Now, you can't just go straight away into the Premier League. That might be, depends on your industry, but that might be the Joe Rogan show. Well, good luck getting onto Joe Rogan if you've never done any podcasts before. That's not going to happen, but you may find that actually you have so much credibility in your industry that you don't need to start with League One. You can start with the Championship and just go straight in there. And once you've got 50 interviews in the Championship, now the lower end of the Premier League will start to talk to you. And once you've got a few of the lower end of the Premier League in, now you can start having conversations with Joe Rogan and his team to say, look, several of the guests that have appeared on this show have appeared on the same podcast that I appear on. I've appeared on their shows. They've appeared on mine. Maybe we should have a conversation about appearing as a guest. So with my clients and customers, it's much more focused on the end objective and where they're trying to get to. Because typically when people come to you for coaching services, it's because they have a goal or a destination in mind. They are trying to achieve something. They're trying to get to somewhere. So my focus is very strategy based on how I'm going to get them there. However, when it comes to me, like, I just love podcasting. Like, I would podcast all day, every day if you'd let me. And I never know who is going to be listening to what podcast. So I'm probably one of those very strange people who will appear on, using the analogy I gave, I will go and appear on some Premier League podcasts like USA Today and that kind of stuff. But then I'll also appear on a podcast that's brand new and might not even have 50 listeners yet. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, I don't know who's listening or when they're going to be listening. This is evergreen content, and I'm not sure who's listening to it when they need to be. So actually, kiss some frogs. Joe Rogan will have had 50 listeners at one point. So who knows where this show is going to go in the future. The second reason is I base it on who I resonate with. Like, do I resonate with what it is you're trying to do in your audience? And a lot of that is based on value add and whether they're trying to empower people. If people come to me and say, Phil, I'd like to get more listeners for my show, will you come on? The answer is usually no. If somebody says to me, Phil, I'm new to podcasting, I'm absolutely loving it, I'm growing my audience, would you mind coming on and sharing some secrets as to how you grew your podcast? Like, I love that. So yeah, I'll come on every day of the week. That sounds fun. That sounds like a great conversation. So I kiss a lot of frogs as well in terms of going on these shows. But, I've genuinely won business from, people saying, oh, let me share this with my network. And then there's one person in that network that hears it that goes, I need to have a conversation with that guy. Plus, you think about how you grow your podcast audience. Like, you grow it in two ways. Okay. So, I'm talking about organically here. You can obviously pay to grow it, but you essentially grow organically in two ways. One is the guests who have been on your show share it out with their network. People know them, so they come and listen to the podcast. They resonate with you, the ones who do. They resonate with you, like what you've got to say. So the next thing they do is they binge listen or binge watch more of your content afterwards to see whether they still like what you're all about. And after about 2 or 3 episodes, they go, I like this guy. I like this girl. I'm going to follow them. I'm going to subscribe. Now they've become a fan, and now you've got an opportunity to continually reach and connect with this person. So that's how you grow. Flip side of that is when you appear on other people's shows, their listeners will listen to you because it's their podcast and go, I like this guy, and they'll follow the exact same formula. So by appearing on different people's shows, you may be adding 10 from one show, you might be adding 100 from another, you might be adding 1,000 from another. They all add up. and they're all heading in the right direction, and you're getting more and more listeners with each one. And more importantly, you're getting more relevant listeners to each one, because the only people who are joining you did so because it felt organic and it felt genuine and it felt authentic, and they want to listen to more of what you're saying.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. We're getting close to time. Did anyone else have any questions? Adrian?
Phil, this is awesome, man. I'm enjoying all of it. I guess,
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one question I have, like, in terms of, completely agree with like the kind of saying yes to as many shows as you can, because I've had this similar experience where you say yes to a show and at first your spidey sense is like, man, I don't know if this is going to make sense. It doesn't feel like it's going to line up. And then literally next week you're talking to the next account or the next coaching gig or whatever you're working on. I guess one question for you is, as you were able to do more and more and more of this, did you find like easier ways to kind of be able to sort of like understand what an ICP or an ideal customer profile or an ideal customer listener? Did you start to kind of pick up on which areas were converting either a little bit higher, or for whatever reason you would kiss a certain frog and then you knew that by kissing that frog you were going to get either more inbound LinkedIn messages or more inbound emails, or maybe it was like even if it was just for the podcast and not necessarily like offline business, but how'd you get better at understanding which frogs to kiss, I guess?
Yeah, I really like that question. So I think a lot of it comes down to understanding kind of how the offline stuff is actually a really interesting barometer for it, because I get people coming to me saying, I listened to this interview and I found it really insightful. So then I'll go back and re-listen to that interview and go, I wonder what it was that they found so powerful in this. A great example of this, and I'll give them a shout out. There was a guest podcast I did earlier in the year with a show called Business Bros. And we basically did a conversation about monetized podcasting. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check out Phil Palucha, Business Bros. And it was a really cool conversation. I had a lot of fun. It was another guy who just gets it with podcasting. He's using it to generate business for his company as well, and he just gets it. So we had a real kind of podcast nerd off. But the amount of people that would come to me and say, it took me like 4 hours to listen to that podcast because I kept pausing every 2 minutes to write down another thing. There's like another golden nugget, another golden nugget. So what I started to do was, when we had inquiries or when we had people who were interested in what we were doing, I'd send them one of my podcasts that I knew people really resonated with and that podcast, and say, here's me as a guest and here's me as a host. Go and check out and have a listen, see what you think. But by the time they've got to the end of that, they're almost at 3 hours worth of content. And as many of you will realize when you do this, one of the great things about this is that when you get a customer on the phone, or you get them on a Skype call or Zoom call or whatever, they feel like they already know you because they've engaged with so much of your content. They've had in their mind, they've had hours of worth of content, of conversations with you. So they come to you at that level. So if you can, you're absolutely right. I love the question. I think it's a case of understanding what it is that people resonate with and why. It's I do it with A/B testing as well, with stuff like my social media clips. So let's say an episode does particularly well, I'll go back through and listen to that episode, and I'll pick out the things that I think are going to be getting people's attention here, and I'll share those 2 to 3 minute clips on social media, and I'll try and spark conversations, and I'll see who responds to what, who's engaging with what, which video is getting the most likes, who's asking what questions. And then I start to understand a bit better what's going on in the industry. And I'll let you in on a little bit of a secret as well that I do. And this has probably been through my days of recruitment when I first got told how to cold call and stuff. It was how to appear as an expert in an industry when you weren't an expert in this industry. It's the whole fake it till you make it kind of thing. And what would happen is I would speak to engineers and they'd be saying stuff like, I'm really looking for a new job at the moment because the company I'm working for, they've made the migration from Magento 2 to Magento 1, and it's just an absolute 1 to 2, and it's just an absolute nightmare. 1 is it does this and it does this, and 2 it's so buggy and it's so laggy, and they're going to be bringing out 3 soon anyway. So what's the point? Well, in the next call, when I'm speaking to another engineer, I say, listen, out of curiosity, have you guys made the migration to 2 yet? Because I'm hearing it's all buggy and there's loads of problems yet. Or are you guys going to just wait till 3 arrives? And then it's like, oh, actually, we're probably going to wait till 3. And, but we might even not do that. We're actually considering moving over to this other system because, ABC Limited is actually doing some really impressive stuff. They're smaller, but I think it could work really well for us. So then the next person I speak to is like, hey, are you doing 1, skipping 2, going to 3? Are you going to try? Have you come across ABC Limited yet? They're doing some really cool stuff. Instantly, within 5 or 6 calls, it sounds like you know exactly what you're talking about. And the thing is with podcasting is, now I'm not suggesting you do the whole fake it till you make it thing, but the thing with podcasting is, don't be afraid to repeat some of the stuff that you're learning from people. You know, like I have clients who work in all kinds of different sectors, tech sectors, banking sectors, customer experience. Customer experience is a really interesting one, because I now ask much more customer experience and customer focused questions of my other guests so that I can learn about their customers, because I'm busy trying to understand them and they're busy trying to understand their customer. So if I can understand them and their customer, boy, that's a powerful position to be in. So it's about kind of understanding what their pain points are and really trying to, going back to value add again, but drive value back towards them. And to answer the question in quite a long way, that's how I also determine who I'm going to be helping with this. Because if that conversation that I'm going to be having can answer some of those questions, or the audience that they're telling me, look, this is the audience I'm aiming for, I'm like, okay, I know who I'm talking to there. I know what I'm going to say. I know how I'm going to add value. Sweet. Let's do it. That's a frog I'm going to kiss, because at some point, more and more people are going to listen to that. But if you come to me and it's something that's nothing to do with me at all, and I haven't got a clue what you're talking about, I will say no to that. Phil, we deal with forensic accountants and we really want to talk about risk management. It's like, speak to someone else. I haven't got a clue,
Phil, that's just going back to another part that you said earlier too. That's why I think those pre-recording calls are like mandatory, because at this point I've gotten good at, I don't even have to say it anymore. I can literally talk someone down a path where it's like, oh well, yeah, so I've built like this type of an audience and this type of an interest group. Doesn't necessarily feel like we match any of those things up, and then like you can literally in a very amicable way have a respectful conversation about how, let me figure out how there's other ways that maybe I can help you, or other ways I can connect you, and then you go down the path.
Absolutely. No, 100%. In fact, I've used it before when I've wanted to speak to somebody and it's been the opposite. They haven't been sure about speaking with me. It's like, I'm not sure, like the audience is going to be the best fit and all this kind of stuff. Ask the question on that podcast pre-call. Look, who is it you're trying to reach? Who is it that you want to speak to? And then I kind of use it as well, look, I could gain a lot from you from this conversation. What I think might be a good idea is, why don't we record a podcast together? I'll ask you these kind of questions, but then what it allows me to do is I can then send this podcast recording to people in my network that do meet that criteria of people you're trying to meet to, and I can make some introductions to you that way. It's a great way to make an introduction, because they get to listen to the podcast, see if they resonate with you, and it's going to be much more efficient for you as well, because you're only going to be speaking with people who really gel with what you're saying. That works a treat as well.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, you're trying to become a thought leader, right? And one of the things that I did for many years on the radio show that I did too is to have a bunch of questions about what the future looks like in a particular industry or whatever, and then try and bring on guests to answer those questions. And then what you wind up doing is you're building your expertise, plus you're sharing it with your audience, and it just kind of steamrollers on you. Yeah.
Absolutely, Rob, it's a great point. In fact, I'll give you all a free tool to use. It's a free resource. It's a website called alsoasked.com. So also ASKED.com. It's a reverse search engineering tool that allows you to search for keywords, and it will tell you in return the most commonly searched questions on Google to do with those keywords. So using that example that Rob just gave there, let's say you wanted to know about the banking industry. If you type in, banking industry, banking sector, it will give you the 50 most commonly asked questions to do with that industry. And that they're keyword friendly because they're the things that are being searched on Google. Now, as you go about finding experts and keynote speakers and guests to come on and answer those questions, not only are you having a great conversation, but before you've even opened your mouth that it's extremely relevant and keyword friendly because it's already being searched for.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. One last question very quickly before we wrap up. Deborah asks, what's your opinion on using podcast guesting as a marketing tool for broadcasting a book release? Or
I love it.
Best to do that only on your own show?
No, absolutely not. No. You go out there and do a virtual book tour, 100%. In fact, I've had some great speakers on my show who have been doing a virtual book tour. I have customers right now who are best-selling authors who are currently doing a virtual book tour, and they're just doing the guesting part of what we do. If you have a book that you're trying to push, definitely get out there and meet other people who, look at who is it you're trying to aim your book at, who is it you're trying to sell to, and who already has that podcast audience. Because you can already add value to them, which is a great reason for them to invite you on the show. But, it's a case of go out, show who you are, showcase who you are, and then say, at the end of every podcast is usually an opportunity, isn't there? How can people get in touch with you? What is it that you want them to do? It's like, well, I have my book. If you've enjoyed what I'm saying, come check out my book. It's on my website. Here's the link. And it's so authentic and genuine. And it's no different to the way we used to sell books. We used to do a physical book tour. You'd go around and you'd do a book signing, and you'd go and do some morning TV shows and all that kind of stuff. Well, podcasting allows you to reach globally very quickly on all the different sides of the planet, and have a really sort of engaging and authentic conversation about your work and your book. So podcasting to broadcast your book is a big must. Like, if it's not part of your publishing plan and your broadcasting plan, it certainly should be.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks so much for your time. Ethan, do you want to wrap this up?
Sure, if that feels good to you guys. I only got to hear a little bit in the middle of things, but what I heard sounded really exciting. I caught that little last tip about just searching for what you're going to interview about, and grabbing all the keywords, and that makes your podcast interview SEO friendly. I think you used the word genius, Vinay. That sounds like a really great idea to pass along. So we appreciate awesome tips like that. And I'm sure there were a bunch of other wonderful things. Luckily, we record all these sessions and I'll be able to review it. So yeah, I think I'm happy to end it and just say next week, what we do, Phil, is we usually do a review session where we review what you talked about with the members of the group. So that's what we'll be doing next week. I'll send an invite out to the email list so people can come check that out.
Awesome.
And just, for you guys' information, I'm doing great. I'm doing great over here. I'm fine. My father did pass this morning, but he was struggling. So it's good that he was able to move on. And I already feel like he's with me wherever I go, so that's really wonderful. But yeah, so thank you very much, Phil. Vinay, anyone else have any parting words before I sign us off?
No, just thanks again, Phil.
You are most welcome, buddy.
I'm sure that others would agree that there's a lot of gold in what you shared. Thanks so much for that. You
are most welcome. It's a real pleasure. And, after 10 years of doing this, a lot of this stuff was learnt the hard way. I often say I took every wrong path before I found the right one. So that's a large reason why I coach now, actually, is because I kind of look at people and it's like, I feel compelled to tell you what not to do just as much as to tell you what you should do. So I really do hope that people took a lot away from this and took some serious value, and it can help you on your own journeys and really grow whatever it is you're doing, whether that be from a podcast perspective or whether that be for your business and better utilizing podcasts to support you with that. And if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, is LinkedIn the best? Yeah, see, there's that bit I told you at the end of every interview. So there's two ways to get in touch with me. LinkedIn is definitely a good one. I have quite an unusual surname. So if you search for Phil Pelucha, which is Pelucha, you can definitely connect with me on there. It'd be great to have a chat with you and speak to you there. Ask me any questions you have, or indeed just follow and check out the content. Or indeed head over to our website, which is billionairesinboxers.com. And check out what we're doing. As you can imagine, all the podcasts are on there, so you can have a good mooch around and have some fun, get lost down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And always willing and happy to answer any questions people have. Terrific. I think that's it for today. Ethan, parting words, otherwise we can wrap this up.
That's all. Actually, you know what we can do is the folks who are attending here, I'll take us offline, but for the hosts of this, if you guys want to stand for